We're continuing our study, Finish Well Like Caleb. We're talking about changes in our lives, major changes, some of the things that are happening and things that are going to happen. And did anybody not get the Survey of Ecclesiastes sheet from last week? Got a couple of those left. Give one to Mary. And remind me after class too, Mary, I'll give you one of the major stressors, change stressors of life. That'd be something good for you to have for teaching purposes. All right, let me get my Bible. Sorry. All right, I hope you've been reading through Ecclesiastes and sort of marking, and this is not a right or wrong, okay? This is, sometimes you read something and it sounds sort of like a bummer statement. I might read it and say, well, that's sort of true, positive or whatever. So it's not what we're looking for is right or wrong answers. It's just a matter of a variety of things. The question that we put at the top of our survey sheet, what in a person's past produces this kind of a bummer attitude? The foolish statements and the negative statements in Solomon's book. What are some of the things that cause us to talk like this and think like this at certain times in our life? It doesn't have to be just when you're older. I mean, this could happen at any point in life. What are some of the things that sort of trigger our stress points?
Bad experiences we've had in different things.
Bad experiences? Okay. We talked last week about one of the major change stressors was relationships with people. Mark mentioned that, I think, last week. And that could be people that you work with, like Eddie experienced. It could be relatives. It could be bad experiences with your neighbors. And it's sad when things go on and on and on when they could be reconciled. But you and I are not responsible for full reconciliation. We're only responsible for our side. And if other people don't want to change their attitudes or their actions about things, we may be able to live peaceably with all men, like Paul reminds us to, but we may not be able to get back the same relationship that we had before. But if we don't, let's make sure it's because we can't, okay? That we have said we will cross over, but the other person won't cross over and even meet us halfway. But leave the door open all the way to the end. Anybody else have some things that would cause us to end up with sort of a bummer attitude? Mark.
Sure, I think you probably already used the word, but prolonged stress can just leak out in a lot of directions.
It wears us down. And we are so connected. You are so connected between the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. One affects the other. When you're sick, when you're down, when you're prolonged stress of any kind, prolonged sickness causes us to have chemical changes, causes us to have emotional changes, and sometimes it's hard to keep focused and keep a good spirit about us, a good attitude. Okay, anybody else?
I think isolation too. I think a lot of times we don't connect or don't share our vulnerabilities, and then you end up feeling isolated in that situation and a lack of connectivity. I mean, scripturally, we're made for connection. We're made to share each other and bear each other's burdens, but then I think sometimes we either self-isolate or become isolated, and then that's a long-term stressor that affects our attitude and how we view things and hopefulness.
I would say when we look back on our lives that we will probably agree that 2020 and everything that happened that year was one of the major impactors on our world, on the whole world, and the people around us that we know of. And there were people that didn't have a connection, like you said, and the loneliness they're gone now. They either shriveled up and died. Some people committed suicide. The alarming number of young people that ended up deeply depressed or suicidal, and some of them actually succeeded at killing themselves during that time, but since then also. It's interesting, though, that something that seemingly connects people, and that is social media, ends up being an isolator, because people can get away with doing something on social media. They can isolate you even when you're sitting in a room full of people. If they tell you you're dirt on your phone and you believe it, there can be some bad things happen because of it. I wrote down a couple of things: broken promises. When people don't keep their promises to us. That's why we need to make sure that we're careful when we make promises. Sometimes we promise things that we can't. It's impossible to keep those promises. People need to understand, our children, grandchildren, young people especially, need to understand that sometimes there are things that happen that cause us not to be able to keep a promise that we've made. I put down sometimes prosperity. Prosperity causes us to end up. In fact, a lot of the verses in Ecclesiastes, Solomon's almost complaining about how much he had. What would be a simple solution to that? Share what. That's right. Share what you got. Man, bless and help other people. This guy has been putting out a lot of money and a lot of miles to help in the ministry that God put me in. And he's been right along there with me. He won't let me put his picture up on the screen either and show him as one of the sponsors either. But last night he got to see, and man, when we see, and when someone responds well to what we've poured into their life, what a blessing. And that's why I wanted him to see that. I wanted him to see it when he wouldn't or couldn't come with me. There were some times that he was working, so I sent him pictures. And I said, this guy is retired Air Force. I sent him one last year of a guy that did not know the Lord. And nobody was sitting at the table with him. Had this big round table at a Wow Game dinner up in Harrison. And he's sitting there. He had a retired Air Force hat on, and he was sort of a, how you doing? Oh, okay, like that. And I was a Vietnam vet. And I said to the couple of guys who were with me, I said, let's go and sit down and sit with that guy at the table and just be friends with him. Well, he looked surprised that we sat down with him. So we're talking, and everything. And he was a nice guy, but pretty gruff, and he didn't know the Lord. And I had some Bibles that I said, these are free military Bibles to pick up, but he didn't pick one up. But I had one Air Force. Well, it was a blue one. It was blue camo, which goes for Air Force or Navy. Like Mike says, the sense of having blue camo on when you fall into the water, they can't find you. He said, you fall off a boat and they can't, where is he? Anyhow, another story. I think all of the older Navy guys laugh at the blue camo. But anyhow, so this guy, we had one, and I made sure that he won it. And I said, did you go over and check the table? No, I never win anything, And I said, man, let me see. So I took his ticket, went over, and when he wasn't looking, I wrote his number up on the board just in case he checked on me. And I took it over, and when I gave it to him, he said, wow, thanks. And he opened it up and started reading it. Well, the beginning of these military Bibles some of them have the plan of salvation in them. That's the first thing, Bible verse and the plan of salvation. I was hoping he wasn't starting in Genesis because it's a long way to John, and he wasn't. And so I was sort of sneaky. I pretended like I was taking a picture of somebody else. And I took a picture of him and I sent it to Don. And I said, Don, he's been sitting there. The speaker got up to speak. He never paid any attention to him. He kept reading his Bible. Well, guess what? He was back at the dinner 3 weeks ago. He came up. He said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "I sure do." He says, "I've got that Bible out in my truck." And he said, "I go to church every week." Now, he didn't share his testimony with him. Maybe he was saved before, but he says, "I still got that Bible out in the car, out of my truck that you gave me last week." So I made sure and told Don about that. But things like that, when you just say, "Oh, is my life making any impact?" It is so good when someone says to us, "Let me tell you what happened as a result of your life." Bad times, broken trust, betrayal, lies. I hate lying. I hate lying when I do it. I hate lying when other people do it. If your word can't be trusted. It's funny because when I give the tickets out, I say, if you're military or former military, you get a ticket. Almost all the military guys start pulling out their military ID to show me. I said, "I don't need your ID. I trust you." "Oh, thanks. Okay. Same way with a firefighter last night. He says, "So I'm first responder. I'm a firefighter. Here's my." I said, "Wait a minute. Wait. It's okay." I trust those guys. But man, break trust with somebody, break your word with someone, and it's a hard, deep hurt. Okay, out of the first couple chapters, anything jumped out at you as far as the first couple chapters? How did you mark the verses? By the way, I will be grading on class participation, so I won't have you turn in your homework, but I will be grading on class participation. Chapter 1 is amazing because it's like a science lesson. You remember Solomon was a scientist. He talks about in chapter 12 the science journals that he wrote. He did a lot of journaling of plants and animals, different species and stuff, even before they had the species. But in chapter 1, it's definitely wisdom literature after verse 3. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Okay, that's the first law of thermodynamics. He stated it. The sun rises and the sun sets. Panting, it returns to its place where it rises. He's talking about the movement of the planets. And even though scientists say, well, the sun doesn't go around the earth, well, that's the way human beings describe it. And it is an accurate description of the travel of the sun and the earth in relationship to each other. In verse 6, he talks the directions, the south and the north. Turning goes the wind to the north to south, and the wind returns in its cycles. Solomon was one of the first people to write down that there were wind cycles on this earth, and there are. It's crazy. You go look at the meteorological charts any day, listen to the news, and they're showing some of the same wind patterns. They shift around, but then they come back the same. The warm winds come from where? The south. We get a wind from the north here, and it's definitely a cold wind. He describes that. All the streams flow to the sea, verse 7, yet the sea is never full. The streams are flowing to the place, and they flow there again. He's talking about the water cycle on the earth. All things are wearisome. Man is unable to speak. The eye is not satisfied by seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. There you go. Rick?
Hey, I hate to bring this up, but he says if the clouds are full, they pour out rain on the earth. I don't know if you've noticed that lately.
You know what? Yeah. They're still pouring out water on the earth, aren't they? They are. It's interesting that The psalmist David had it written down before man discovered that the way you get rain out of a cloud is to add electricity. It's in the Psalms. You know, Benjamin Franklin's out there risking his life flying a kite with a key on it. And I heard Paul Harvey say many times, most of the experiments that man did and finally thought he was really smart for discovering them were in the Bible 1,000 years before Christ. And it is true. Basically, what he's saying in verse 8 and 9 is that the earth is a closed system, and it is. Okay. Anybody else have any markings there from chapter 1? What about verses 1 and 2?
That's always stood out to me. Everything is abandoned.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything,
It all stinks.
like Eeyore.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, I put foolishness. That's that word that's used 33 times in the book. It means vanity or foolishness. I forget how. There may be one other English word that's used in some of the translations for it, but futility, yes. And it means emptiness. It means all bummer things for sure. But he uses it so much, but he doesn't use it all the time. That's a good thing. I'll tell you what, if it was all bummer through there, I'd have stopped reading it about chapter 2. I would have missed to everything there is a season. There's some really good stuff in here. But, you know, if you went back and looked at our journals, or if our brains could dictate journals, we got bummer times, we got good times, and some good crazy times, and some positive wise times. If you live long enough, something wise is eventually going to come out. I'm still working on it, still living for that day. All right, anybody else? Yeah.
I was just
Tip.
gonna say, those first verses there, 1 and 2, parallel with today's thinking and lost man's mind. All these mass shootings, where a person wants to go in and hurt other people and take themselves out. They want other people to hurt and feel pain too as they go out themselves.
Uh-huh.
And it's the fact that they are totally devoid of any realization that there's anything beyond this life, and so they think that's the end, and they want to hurt other people when they go out too, because they have pain, and they want to put that on project that on other people, and you know, life is vanity to them. There's no purpose, no reason to live.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that flies, you know, all the way up to today as far as these verses written way back then, but certainly apropos to today's society and the way people think as of late. Seems like in the last decade or so of all the shootings.
Yeah.
Just so beautiful.
Yeah. Now, some of you might criticize me for saying this, but if those guys, if the mass shooters would just shoot themselves first, okay, and then those innocent people wouldn't die. I'm not hardened to what it was that brought the person to that point, but the choices that we make, and they are choices. We have a will. We have the ability in most cases to make the choices. You just wonder sometimes if somebody couldn't have intervened with that one person. And that would have been a lot better. Okay, good comment. Anybody else? The last part of, verse 11. Verse 11 seems to me it's an untrue statement. There's no memory of those who came before. Does anybody have a different translation of that? If he's saying that those who have died have no memories, okay, that's not a true statement either. But it's almost like saying, well, who's going to remember? After we die, who will remember? Well, that's the whole purpose of this 8 or 9 weeks of our study, to make sure that we remember that people will remember us, and we can determine what they remember about us by the way that we live our lives. Mark?
Remember this version says no one will remember what we are doing now.
Okay. Well, in some cases, that would be nice if they did, but we like to remember the good things. Somebody over on this side, Mike, did you say something? Rick?
Yeah, this is, there is no remembrance of the earlier things.
Okay.
The later or latter things as well,
Okay.
which will occur.
Yeah, but it's interesting that, for example, different forms of dementia that we have today are more with the current memories. We talked with my brother-in-law's dad, who was he and his wife were my parents' best friends down in Florida, and we talked to him as much as 3 or 4 months before he died, and his memory was perfectly clear about all kind of things, World War II and all the way up, not quite to the present. And then it started getting a little bit fuzzy, but he remembered the things of the past. So, and that's the way most dementias seem to be. Beth?
So the way I would look at it is like this. Did you meet your great grandfather?
Did I meet him? No.
So you don't remember him.
Okay. True.
Have you met your great grandchildren? No.
No.
So you don't have memory of those. You have memories passed down, but they're not yours. No one remembers the people of former days because we weren't there. They're not our memories. Now, are those memories passed down to us? Yes, but that's different. That's
Second hand, right?
Yeah, that's a relation and legacy. That's not a personal memory. So
Good point. Good point, because also some of our memories, I remember some things, or at least I think I do, from when I was real little. Do I really remember them, or do I remember my mom and dad telling about what happened? I don't know. Can't. Yeah, or seen a picture of it. Yeah. Where is that picture now? I don't know. But good point. That this is beyond what we actually saw and experienced. Okay.
So from a worldly kind of man's wisdom perspective, that could have two kind of angles to it. Like she's saying, it's a reminder that our days are short upon the earth. Another thing is, if this is written by Solomon and in his day, all the civilizations and kingdoms are building monuments, and up till now, even things to try to remind us of the great things that these leaders had done. And here's another bummer statement, like nobody's gonna remember any of this, kind of defeatism in a way,
Isn't it interesting? The current trend is to destroy memory of the past, and it's focused. It's for a definite purpose. I never hear anybody petitioning to tear down a statue of somebody who was really mean, nasty, and vicious.
is it to tear down remembrance of the past or wisdom gained from the experience from the past? Because that's not the same thing. Our culture is not trying to take away memory. They're trying to reshape it and take away the wisdom. No one is denying that the Civil War happened. They're just trying to rewrite what happened.
Well, they're not denying it yet.
Right, but I'm just saying,
But-
like, so many of these things that they're canceling, they're not actually taking the events away. They're just rewriting them to remove the wisdom that was gained. I don't know.
Okay, the purpose, what happened during the Civil War. Okay, for example, I hear people, they're tearing down somebody like Stonewall Jackson. Okay, not a perfect man. Okay, later in his life, a professing believer in Jesus Christ, started the first, and it was illegal, Baptist church for black people. And you can visit it today in Lexington, Virginia, on his plantation. Started the first, and it was illegal, school for black children in the South, and it's still there on his plantation. Did he own slaves? Yes, he owned slaves. He even had children by one of their women slaves. But so throw it all away. Robert E. Lee, almost a theologian, a godly man. Throw all of those things away. All of the good people are getting thrown away and trashed these days. That's why we've got to keep going with what we have. Oral tradition is very important. Our written tradition is also important too. We've got to tell our kids the stories, the honorable stories, the stories of what God has done in our life. And sometimes we will tell them the times when we failed and how we learned from that. But we've got to keep the things about the good people going forward, because the world is not going to hang on to them. They want to hang on to the bad stuff. Mark, look, I get a thought right there on the tip of your tongue.
Fooled you.
Ah, okay. All right. All right. Well, the eyes weren't closed, so that's good. Okay. Basically, there's an interesting statement in verse 15. Well, he talks about wisdom in verse 12. I, the teacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to seek and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. God has given people this miserable task, okay, a little bit bummer there, to keep them occupied. There's about 4 or 5 times in Ecclesiastes, I didn't note them, but it's almost like he's saying, God just gave us something to do. I don't think that's what he means, but that's what it seems like. And sometimes that's the way it can seem to us. Why are we still living? Well, I'm still alive. What can I do? Well, nothing. I'll just stay alive. I'll keep my grass cut, and I'll be good to my neighbors. And when there is more purpose that God has for our lives, and he says that in chapter 12 at the end of it, fear God, honor his word. He talked about writing. He talks about teaching others, about impacting. I stopped and said to Doug Hodges on the way in, I said, Doug, you and I are too old to do things by ourselves. I said, if you're going to plant churches, I'm going to suggest that you plant churches with a Dominican church planter right beside of you. Train him as you're going. And after the first or second church that you two guys plant together and then turn over to another Dominican, he can plant one. I like his baseball analogy, by the way. I could understand that. I said, he can plant one at shortstop while you're planting one at second base. And he said, oh, yeah. Well, it's a biblical principle. 2 Timothy 2:2, the things you have learned, teach others, who shall be able to teach others also. He doesn't say, you go and be the one teaching all those people. You train trainers. That's what Burdett Bergen left when he came back from Germany. He left people over there that he had trained. He helped plant churches alongside of Germans, right?
Indirectly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me how you did it.
Well, directly I was working with an American, but we have an organization that helped Germans plant churches too.
And you started a school to train them to do that,
Yeah.
and theology and all of it.
Right.
Okay. And who are most of the church planters over there now?
Germans.
Okay.
2 of our churches have already started daughter churches.
Okay.
So,
Awesome.
exciting.
Yeah, that's important for us. Okay, we're about to finish up here. We're going to finish up a little bit early so you can get out before the rest of the church leaves, okay? I'm sorry. Okay, interesting. Verse 15, what is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. True statement or not?
Again, this is man's wisdom, right?
What?
I said again, this is man's wisdom, right?
Mhm.
So David, his father, says, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a true statement as it is, but it's not a true statement if you say that person who is addicted to drugs can never be not addicted to drugs. Left to themselves, it's probably not going to happen. It's humanly impossible for some people to break drug addictions. Not everybody, because not everybody has the physical makeup that their body is demanding the drug. Some people just get into it on the side and they're not addicted. Some people smoke for My uncle smoked for 30 years and quit cold turkey in the last, let me see, he smoked from the time he was 15 probably till 50. So that's a little bit more, 35 years. And didn't smoke from then until he died in his mid 80s. And he didn't die from lung cancer. There's a surprise. How did he do it? He came to Christ from an alcoholic position when he was about 21 or 2. He was a in the depths alcoholic. Thank you. And came to Christ after hearing the gospel in a church meeting, went home and came to Christ and never drank a drop the rest of his life. That's it. Didn't. God did that. But some people have more struggles with it. But he says later on, he makes a statement that basically is this: without God, the crooked cannot be straightened. And so it's a true statement. All right, anything else, anybody, before we go? I want you to notice something as you're reading this week. Notice what he says about work. And there's some statements that he makes about work and about rejoicing in your work that we're going to look at as we start our class next week. Some important statements. They almost sound like eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But he's not saying that. And as I've seen how many of these, there's like 6 or 8 different passages that he talks about how futile it is that people work all their life and don't get any satisfaction, any rejoicing out of it. I think that was part of his problem. I think that was one of the things he accomplished so many things, but he did them just, I got to do this, then I got to go do this, and I got to go do that. He was somewhat of a workaholic, and workaholics don't stop and enjoy the things that they're doing. It's like working hard to produce a garden and not eating any of the fresh vegetables, sell them or give them away. Well, what's the use? I get to the end of it, and you know, your wife would say, "What's the use? Why are you doing this?" You know, and anytime they say that, I think we should listen. Okay, notice I included myself. Okay, all right, let's pray. Father, thank you for bringing us through times that we've been down and low and even spoken foolish things. You have given us wisdom that Solomon says comes from you. Lord God, help us to finish the task that you've given to us. Excuse me. Help us to be like Solomon and write the things down and speak fewer words but wiser words, and be ready to turn things over to our successors. The kids and grandkids that we have trained, begin to let them make the decisions and do the heavy lifting on the things of life, and help us to slow down and in some cases to stop and enjoy the things that you have accomplished and put back into our life as a blessing. We're sorry that we had those blessings and sort of blew by them without tasting the fruit, but help us to do that and to finish well in Jesus' name. Amen.